Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to the discussion nobody wanted to have but me and perhaps Steve Donoghue, who was nice enough to indulge me. And that's a discussion about DudeBro Lit. The last two Saturday hodgepodges I've talked about mentioned the term DudeBro Lit and asked you 2 Saturdays ago, what it meant to you, what you thought of, or what you thought DudeBro Lit was. And I got some really good responses to that. And Steve Donoghue finally made a video in which he explained his definition of DudeBro Lit and what he thought about it. Something that he and I talked about, kind of bantering back and forth in the comments section. And so he made that video. It's called The 7 Sins of DudeBro Lit. I'll leave a link to it down below. It is well worth going to see. In the responses I got to my Saturday hodgepodge video 2 Saturdays ago, there were a lot of kind of interesting things. The number one comment was a lot of people said either they'd never heard the term DudeBro Lit, or that if they had heard it, they heard it mainly used as kind of a negative about a type of literature or books that some people didn't like, and they used the term to demean kind of books they didn't like. The most interesting comments I got, though, were from booktubers who said that when they thought of DudeBro Lit, they didn't necessarily think so much of a specific author or even a work of fiction, but more the attitude of readers of those books had, kind of an attitude of superiority, an attitude of privilege, an attitude that says, well, if you're not familiar with these works, if these works aren't to you great literature, then you don't know what you're talking about. This attitude was perfectly encapsulated, I thought, in a tweet I saw, I think from Kendra Winchester last week, in which she or somebody, maybe she retweeted it, was talking about, having discussions about women writers and fiction written by women, and invariably, in the course of that, if there was a man present, the man would ask, yeah, but have you read Murakami, meaning Haruki Murakami? And that this was just kind of one of those really frustrating things for them. And this, I think, kind of portrays that attitude that some DudeBro Lit fans seem to carry with them, a certain amount of arrogance. And that arrogance may or may not be reflected in the works themselves or in the authors. But Steve made a really good video about this. And in the video, he did two things. First of all, he chose 4 works of literature to kind of show the difference between what he considers to be DudeBro Lit and something similar that isn't. So he chose 4 books, 2 pairs. The first pair of books being The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, which Steve referred to as the urtext of the DudeBro Lit movement, and he contrasts that with Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and then he also contrasted Cormac McCarthy's All the Pretty Horses with Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, with The Old Man and the Sea and All the Pretty Horses representing Steve's idea of DudeBro Lit, and the other books representing books both by male authors, both over similar subjects, which he points out, I think quite rightly, are not DudeBro Lit. So moving on then from those 4 books, those 2 pairs of books, Steve talked about 7 sins of DudeBro Lit. Steve says that these 7 things are present in all works of DudeBro Lit, and perhaps that's true, but I don't think it's necessarily true of all things that people think of as DudeBro Lit. So let me just go through the 7 things, the 7 sins Steve Donoghue mentioned. Sin number 1 and 2. Sin number 1 is that DudeBro Lit contains misogyny, and sin number 2 is that DudeBro Lit is sexist. I certainly think that there are any number of works of DudeBro Lit, and Steve mentions many of them, which do contain, are misogynistic. I do think that's true, and I think the number of those books that are sexist is even greater. And so I'm willing to accept that those 2 things are part of what people mean, or at least Steve means, and other people mean by stuff that would be considered DudeBro Lit. But I want to set those 2 things aside for just a second and talk about those 2 things separately. While I accept that those 2 things may be features of DudeBro Lit, if that's what we're talking about in these books, that is that qualifies them for derision. And I don't think you can use the term DudeBro Lit and not be pejorative. If those are the two things we're talking about that qualify DudeBro Lit for derision, then I think we should just call them what they are: misogynistic, sexist works of literature, and kind of not use the term DudeBro Lit to describe them. I think calling them misogynist, calling them sexist is far more direct and clear than putting them under this heading of DudeBro Lit. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that things we might still consider DudeBro Lit don't exist without those two things. I'm going to disagree with Steve and say that I think that DudeBro Lit can exist without those two things, and that DudeBro Lit can exist as a genre absent of those two things. So, to talk about this, I want to go through Steve's other 5 sins. So, his sins, DudeBro Lit, come in pairs, like misogyny and sexism. So the next pair of the DudeBro Lit sins have to do with the tendency of DudeBro Lit authors to describe actions or pieces of equipment or things in detail. A detailed description of, a hunting scene where we get a blow-by-blow account of how the hunter, takes aim and loads his weapon and steadies himself and breathes and what part of the animal he aims at and how he pulls the trigger, and this kind of step-by-step list, itemized list. Sometimes it can literally just be an inventory of things the author is listing. I'm willing to accept that a lot of DudeBro Lit has stuff like that in it. Whether it's DudeBro Lit with the other two things, misogyny and sexism, or not, I'm willing to accept that that's true. I'm also willing to accept that there are examples of DudeBro Lit writers who commit sin number 4, which to invest that kind of detailed description of an action or of equipment or something like that, or of this inventory of things, to invest that inventory, invest that description, invest that action with some kind of deeper cosmic sociological meaning. And as Steve says, to imply that men, having lost these skills, having lost this understanding, having lost this knowledge, are somehow diminished, and that the world is a worse place. I'm also willing to accept that a lot of DudeBro authors and DudeBros themselves think about these things that way. So I'm willing to accept that those two things are there. I would say that I'm not sure that every DudeBro writer who writes a detailed description about firing a gun or taking aim at an animal and hunting, I'm not sure that every one of them is trying to invest that process, that description with deeper meaning. And I'm not sure that every time you see an itemized list or an inventory, that it's not really more about characterization than some kind of deeper meaning, deeper sociological meaning. But leave that aside. I'm willing to accept that these are also elements of DudeBro Lit. Sins 5 and 6 are also paired together. Sin 5, Steve describes as that these authors structure and write their books like a video game, that rather than having a real plot progression, the story stumbles from one kind of exciting, adrenaline-pumping moment to another. And then that leads to Sin 6 of DudeBro Lit, that it intentionally appeals not to the thinking, critical part of your brain you use when you read actual literature, but it appeals to that part of your brain that gets off on that adrenaline rush, that gets off on that kind of high that you get from reading something exciting. And I can see examples of that. I would say that Murakami's The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, if you think about it, the action in that kind of moves like one of these open world video games where the character stumbles from place to place and runs into person after person and deals with one kind of difficult situation after another, much as you do in those kind of video games. I'm willing to accept that modern writers of DudeBro Lit do that. I'm not sure how Hemingway wrote structured books based on video games which didn't exist, but if what Steve means by that is that they're just writing these kind of cliffhangery, exciting, moment-to-moment kind of thriller-style books, well, okay, yeah, maybe that's what they're doing, and certainly I wouldn't argue that those books appeal to a different part of your brain, but surely DudeBro Lit is not alone in doing that. Surely other genre fiction does exactly that. I mean, the thriller category does that, horror categories do that, detective stories do that, true crime, probably even romance, YA, they all have that kind of appeal. And so, part of what I'm getting at here is that maybe we should consider DudeBro Lit minus the first two features to be kind of a genre. And I think that's really then backed up by what Steve calls sin number 7, and that is that the books are addictive, that they're written to be addictive, that they're written to be consumed kind of compulsively, that when the readers read them, they're actually getting a hit rather than reading. So that then kind of brings me to where I think I have the biggest disagreement with Steve. I think, and this is kind of summing up what I said, I think if we find works of literature that are misogynistic, that are sexist, we should identify them as such and not call them DudeBro Lit, and just set those books aside. We might still read them. They might be considered classics. They might have, other redeeming qualities. I know Steve doesn't believe that's true about Hemingway, but set them aside and call them what they are, misogynistic and sexist. And then look, because there have to be these books, these kind of other dude-bro-ish books, which may cross other genre lines, that are just, entertainment, that are entertaining in the sense that they are structured like video games, that they try to provide this kind of adrenaline rush, that they have in them things like the description of hunting or firing a gun or building something that appeal maybe more to male readers than to others, that appeal to dude bros in their fiction, and that are, in effect, addictive, and just looking at those as a genre, as the dude bro genre. Well, if we just set it aside and treat it as a genre, then it's no more harmful than any others. And by the way, I'll just point out, Steve Donoghue is not saying you shouldn't read DudeBro Lit. He reads a lot of things that are just kind of like candy for him, that he just enjoys reading. Not necessarily for literary merit, but because he just enjoys reading them. So that kind of then brings me back to the comments that other people made about how what bothered them about DudeBro wasn't the books, but the insistence that readers of those books had that those books were real works of literature, that they had to be taken seriously, that they were better than all these other books. Well, a couple of things I would say about that. If we classify DudeBro as a genre, then I think we kind of effectively deal with that issue, because while genre fiction can rise, and sometimes does rise to the level of what people consider to be literature, oftentimes genre fiction is written for fun and for entertainment, and DudeBro Lit written that way is fine. It's those rare pieces of, or rare-ish pieces of DudeBro Lit, like some of the works of McCarthy, or some of the works maybe of David Foster Wallace or Haruki Murakami, that contain the other elements, that contain elements of misogyny and sexism. It's the elevation of those books and people who treat those books as serious literature without acknowledging their very serious flaws. That's the obnoxious part. The author may be guilty of that kind of obnoxiousness. I can think of no more obnoxious author alive and at work who's taken more seriously in America, in the world today, than McCarthy himself. But there's that obnoxiousness about what they write that really causes the problem. Anyway, so my advice would be, let's call misogynistic, sexist works of literature what they are, and not DudeBro Lit, and let's see if there is an actual genre to be created out of other works of DudeBro Lit that contain all the other sins that Steve talks about, which lots of other genres do, minus the misogyny and sexism. Now, Steve may not think that's possible, but I have to think that it is. Anyway, there you go. That's my discussion of DudeBro Lit. I hope that made sense, and I hope I didn't repeat myself too often. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.